All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for your time today. It's really exciting to have you again joining our Australasian Coastal Restoration Network webinar. This is an event which Megan and I are trying to run every month or so. And so we're really excited today to have Dr. Dominic McAfee to give a presentation on 25 Reef Project, community-based shellfish reef restoration in South Australia. I want to first start off by acknowledging country. I'm in Townsville at James Cook Uni, and I'm on Wulgurukaba and Bindal country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And also all around Australia, many of us are working with traditional owners, and it's really important that we pay respects and welcome their input into certainly the work that we're doing and the partnerships that are being formed. That's really important. Thanks for your time today. This is our second webinar, and so really excited that so many have made the time to join today. We have scheduled the next few months of webinars, and we have a few spots reserved for later in the year. So Megan and I would certainly welcome any ideas that you might have across the network. These are really exciting ways of sharing high profile, highly interesting projects that many of us are involved with across Australia. So do reach out if you're interested, and we'll try and work through whether we can fit into the schedule. This webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be made available soon after the event. We're going to host these on the ACRN website, so you certainly can share that among your lab staff, your colleagues and friends as much as possible to get the messages out there. So we really appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over. So we're really excited, Dom, today for your time. I know you're incredibly busy at the moment, so really appreciate your opportunity to give us some time and give us an update on the work that you've been doing in South Australia. So with that, I'll open the floor to you, Dom. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks, Nathan, Katie and Megan, for the opportunity to talk. I'm speaking to you today from Ghana country, but I work across a whole host of Aboriginal lands and waters, and so I pay my respects to communities right across South Australia. This image is from Naya country in Coffin Bay, one of my favourite places in the world. It's absolutely stunning, and it's wonderful to share the research and work with the local Naya community and to sort of build capacity in sort of collaborative research going forward. So today I'm going to give you a bit of insight into the last year of my life and the journey up until this point that has enabled the 25 Reefs project, because it's quite an unorthodox project for government to fund. And my head's still spinning about what I need to deliver over the next few years, but it's really exciting to see this sort of work funded in a meaningful way. In a nutshell, it comes down to having a robust scientific evidence base that is trusted, that government feels they can invest in, really clear and consistent communication among many different partners that have enabled this project. And a hell of a lot of consultation. And the consultation is really what has taken up my life over the last 6 months in particular. We're only we've had funding for about 5 months, but the project started before we received the funding. It's a 3-year project to construct 25 community-based reef restorations involving community in a whole host of different ways. And we've already constructed 6, or started the construction of 6, considering that historically it's taken often a year to receive permits to initiate these sorts of reef restorations. We're doing quite well, but in getting these reefs in the water and doing that in a sort of trusted, co-designed way is the major challenge for this project, given that we have deliverables within 3 years. But we're certainly not thinking about this as a 3-year project. This is a long-term, community-driven project, and we need to find a sustainable funding model beyond the 3 years. So you'll be familiar with this image. I'm not going to labour on it, but I always like to bring it up because it just reminds us of the sense of scale we need to be thinking about working at over the coming decades, and the challenge ahead of us to achieve those scales. And then it's also a global issue. You know, these are not esoteric projects. They always have local conditions that you need to adapt to. But what we're doing here in South Australia and right across Australia is globally applicable. And it's also just to remind us the importance of this sort of research that we do. You know, this paper was a real catalyst for change. It certainly changed my life. I was looking for an honours project, and a few months earlier this had been published, and that started my journey. And it also changed the conversation around restoration investment. At the time that this was published, there was not a lot of discussion around restoration of shellfish reefs outside of North America. And that's changed in a relatively short period of time. In South Australia, I moved here to work on the first large-scale restoration, and I found a fertile place for this research. There's a lot of community interest. It's South Australian culture is very much coastal. People live and breathe the sea quite literally, and the harmful algal bloom has underscored how important healthy coastlines are to our socio-economic and cultural well-being. If our coasts suffered these blooms year upon year, it's hard to know what that would mean for the future of South Australia's economy, because so many people just rush to the sea any chance they have, and much of our regional coastlines, which is the vast majority, 90+% of people live in Adelaide, but we have thousands of kilometres of coastline, and you know, coastal tourism is so important. But in South Australia, we've got a fairly pioneering government in this space over the past 10 years, and they've enabled restorations to happen when, you know, they could have easily stalled, but there was key individuals in places within government that saw the bigger picture. And you know, the power of the individual, the high-level champion, cannot be dismissed when it comes to enabling projects like this. You need somebody with that long-term vision. With almost a decade of restoration under our belt now, and you know, in 2015 it was just a sort of tabletop size reefs that was starting to be constructed in Victoria. And this is when the National Shellfish Reef Restoration Community first started to come together and talk about how do we scale these sorts of projects. And within a very short period of time, we had Windra Reef being constructed, started in 2017, led by the Nature Conservancy, but initially by the South Australian Government. The first 4 hectares were built by the government. 20 hectares, really ambitious, big infrastructure project, cranes, boulders, offshore, and really impressive projects to see constructed within just a matter of years from when the historical baseline of South Australian oyster reefs, published in 2015. Prior to that, nobody was talking about shellfish restoration. So in a short period of time, we've had a lot of buy-in into restoration. And over the past decade, that's built confidence in that we know how to do it. And therefore, that provides confidence to invest in shellfish restoration. Confidence that doesn't necessarily exist at this stage for really large-scale kelp restoration or seagrass restoration. And I think that's reflected in the response to the harmful algal bloom. There was $20 million dedicated to marine restoration activities and conservation activities, and the lion's share of that has gone towards shellfish reefs, and not this particular project either. These limestone boulder reefs have provided proof of concept that that shellfish habitats can be restored. When the boulders first went in the water, we didn't know if we're going to have any oyster recruitment at all. Baseline surveys finding about 1 adult oyster per 300 metres squared. That was a concern. Some of these reefs were seeded, but the seeding really did nothing relative to the natural recruitment, which was in the number of hundreds of millions within weeks of boulders going down on the seabed. And I've even got one right here conveniently. After this is after just 1.5 years, you can see this boulder is absolutely, if you can see it, is absolutely crusted with oysters, some of which are getting close to reproductive size. And within about a year and a half, 1 hectare of reef, I'm talking about Glenelg Reef at the moment, was filtering 6 million litres of water a day per hectare. And those sorts of numbers were really useful when we started to talk about, well, how do we address the ecological collapse that we've witnessed over the last year, following with the harmful algal bloom, which, by the way, is still going. So these projects with the limestone boulder reefs have been a success. The ecological success has varied between sites, a lot of variability. The social buy-in, though, has been relatively consistent. But they requiring cranes and boulders and barges, it's been challenging to sustain community engagement in a habitat that they don't necessarily see, with the exception of a few underwater videos from time to time. So that's made me think a lot over the last few years, half decade, about how we can have more community-based projects and more community involvement. So I've thrown a lot of energy, research energy and collaboration into community engagement in restoration. And it's fantastic to see that now recognised in some of our most important policy documents, such as the Global Biodiversity Framework, that there's this recognition of the need for a whole of society approach by all actors of society, all levels of government. There's a role for everyone to play, and it's really useful communicating that when you're actually talking with community on the ground, letting them know that they have a role to play in achieving global conservation biodiversity targets. Just quickly, a meta-analysis recently done with a team, which is now going to peer review, shows that community-based marine restoration, we think about them as small, quirky projects sometimes, just a few local champions, but they're not marginal or peripheral activities. Globally, they are prevalent, particularly in places where socioeconomic livelihoods are really tied to healthy coastlines, so tropical areas, and the vast majority of work that's been done has been on tropical mangrove projects, where community have driven those projects. And these are areas which are often underrepresented in the scientific literature. This meta-analysis of 188 projects around the world is only a small snapshot of how many community-based projects are actually underway all around the world, because they need that sort of academic engagement to reach the scientific literature. But they provide so many opportunities for researchers to learn about the social and ecological opportunities of community-based restoration. And the outcomes from that meta-analysis show that, as scientists, we're still obsessed with thinking about the environmental benefits and seldom picking up on those human well-being benefits, which are so critical for sustained investment in these sorts of projects. Similarly, the economic outcomes. And that's, I guess, not a surprise. It's hard to do human research, human ethics and longitudinal studies with funding limitations are pretty difficult. But what I like about this project, this meta-analysis, is that it shows that community-based projects, even though the social and economic outcomes are underrepresented, shows that they provide a pathway for achieving a lot of different policy goals, such as the Sustainable Development Goals for life underwater, to protect and restore ecosystems, sustain fisheries, and increase the economic benefits and the equity in which that is shared. They provide a foundation for more equitable coastal management. So I've loved engaging with different projects across the state. Just two very quickly. This is a decade-long coastal restoration project at Greenley Beach on the Eyre Peninsula, where a local primary school grows seed stock, these coastal shrubs, and then the whole community or a local community comes together. Sometimes it's 150 people, multiple generations. Kids get involved. There's educational opportunities. The school teachers talk about the increase in student confidence and focus in school, the mental well-being benefits and social cohesion outcomes from these sorts of projects. And in 3 weeks, it's going to be a big party celebrating the 10-year anniversary of this Coast Care project. Me coming in as a researcher, they're really happy to have me involved. I'm not doing the work, I'm just trying to capture the story and help them find funding pathways and other ways of sustaining this work. Lots of fun for kids. There's my daughter pretending to be an emu as she disperses quandong seeds, because emus have been removed from this area and would have been the natural dispersers historically. And Ozfish does this very well. So I love working with Ozfish. And here's just an example of one of the ways that I think researchers can support these community-based projects. I worked closely before Brad Martin was running the South Australian Ozfish program. I was working with the former program managers, and we just sort of conducted some research to show whether or not the ROB, the robust oyster basket approach to restoring native oysters in an estuary, the Port River estuary that's full of non-native species, was a feasible restoration approach. And yeah, some excellent outcomes, which I think will be hopefully quite beneficial for Ozfish moving forward. Beyond that, to demonstrate those broader benefits, I've been focusing on sort of human well-being outcomes from restoration and also the economic benefits of supporting conservation volunteering. And a really good example is that Greenley Beach project, because that received a tiny amount of funding from the local landscape board to achieve a monumental outcome, which the landscape board certainly couldn't achieve. But by just providing some infrastructure and some know-how and a small amount of funding, they've been able to sustain a decade-long restoration through community passion, but also providing that coordination. So these are a couple of recent papers by PhD student Erin Pitchler, who's recently finished. But this is the sort of work, these are some of the knowledge gaps I think are really important to plug, so investors can see community-based restoration as a viable way for achieving multiple outcomes, not just environmental. And this work, about to be published by Michelle Holland, PhD student, provides the foundations for what we're trying to do with the 25 Reef project, which is achieve sort of the sustainable social capital for sustaining work beyond the funding that has been provided, beyond the scale that we can provide as practitioners and environmental scientists. Several hundred community-based projects in the literature survey to recognise what are those key principles that help sustain and achieve successful governance of equitable, socially just, community-based coastal restoration. So keep an eye out for this paper. There are very few projects out there that embody these 12 principles, but it's those three foundations that are coloured there: sustainable social capital, social justice and equity, and long-term interdisciplinary science, that we really need to be working hard to achieve, I think, to make sure that projects are sustained long-term. And then this is an initiative of a community-based restoration that I've presented over the last few years at conferences, which has recently been published. These were the first incremental steps of what is now the 25 Reef project, where a small scale, very limited amount of funding to engage community and school students has led to some pretty insightful social and ecological research on the feasibility of restoring oyster reefs in an area where they were decimated, Coffin Bay. And we scuba diving trained 10 high school students with a small pocket of funding. They weren't out of pocket. And it was really the parents that drove that. Of course, they literally had to drive their kids to Coffin Bay for all the volunteering opportunities. And they were the ones who continued to follow up with us, wondering when the students could get back in the water. They constructed small restoration reefs at 8 sites across Coffin Bay. And within 3 to 4 months, we had to remove them because of the periodic permits that we had. But they were absolutely chock full of life, chock full of oysters. And that was a really valuable way of processing those with the students to engender some optimism around this work, but also educational benefits, and also sort of provide new career opportunities. And some of those students, when we started this, were in year 10, and then they're now working in the conservation sector. We cycled these results back to community through community forums. There were multiple community forums just to be able to recognise that there is a lot of public buy-in for more of this sort of work. So those were some of the foundations for the community-based shellfish program. And we were wondering how we're going to sustainably fund this going forward. And then the algal bloom hit, and all of a sudden the context for this work changed. So the harmful algal bloom, not many people outside of the state heard about it until it hit the Adelaide metropolitan coast. But probably from at least March last year, probably a couple of months earlier, it was creating scenes like this where you have almost complete mortality of bivalves. Cephalopods really hard hit early on. And this stubborn, persistent, dynamic bloom has continued to move across the state. It's covered at least 20,000 square kilometres of seafloor and persisted at depths far greater than we anticipated. There's been some recent announcements by state government that the bloom is more or less over, but no one would in the scientific community would be comfortable with supporting that sort of commentary, because it just continually surprises us. Certainly the signs are good in terms of how much it's been reduced, but my students out just last week on the York Peninsula could see obvious signs of the persistent bloom. This is what most people saw. Sharks started acting really weird, being in the shallows, and certainly the rays and all these iconic fishes were what we used by media campaign, and lots of people were seeing the death and devastation washing up on their shorelines. People were scared to go in the water, understandably. But this is just a tiny, tiny snapshot of the true devastation of the bloom. Naturally, I was very concerned about reef restorations. And here's a couple of videos. This one is pre-bloom. The bloom was happening, but it hadn't yet hit the metropolitan coast. You can see an Eclonia patch there we transplanted 3 or 4 years ago. And then within just over 2 months later, when the bloom had really incredibly high density, cell densities on the metropolitan coast. You can see all that particulate matter. That's just literally the dead dissolving bodies of countless organisms. Polychaetes, so many different infaunal groups and epifaunal groups that weren't washing ashore and that nobody really knows that much about in terms of how devastating the impact was. Here you're asking, what about the oysters? Well, a lot of bivalve communities have been absolutely devastated, and I was going around and checking out the razorfish beds everywhere I could. And these razorfish beds, these communities, which are so important for the local ecology, they provide excellent settlement substrate for native oysters as well. And it's pretty much 100% mortality of the razorfish. I think I've probably looked at close to, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000, and I've only found 2 alive, and it's in all that time. And there's a lot of citizen science community groups also going out and surveying, looking for any live razorfish, but they're pretty much all dead. But the native oysters have definitely demonstrated a pretty high level of resilience. The image on the right there that's a dead razorfish, absolutely covered in native Angassi oysters in a very heavily long-term impacted coastline along Kangaroo Island. And all of those oysters are alive. And that is what I witnessed at multiple sites throughout the bloom. I was very sort of cautious with that information because knowing that the situation was continually changing, we still hadn't even at that stage identified the main Karenia harmful algal bloom species, Karenia cristata, that was producing the brevetoxins that are so impactful for so many groups. But at this time, there was a lot of community forums going on, a lot of talk and ecological grief and misery. That's still around, and it was pretty difficult to deal with going out and talking to community groups, and everyone's in tears, understandably. But I kept the news about the oysters quite close to my chest. As soon as the word got out, the media jumped all over it, and there was a lot of excitement, and they started to talk about it in these algal bloom forums. That it was really good to see the state government running those right across the state. I think they ran at least 18. Some of them are even recently, where they'll just go out, and the minister and Mike Steer of PIRSA, the chief scientist, were going out and talking to the community. At that stage, I was asked to produce a project proposal for about $50,000. I suggested we could do a community-based shellfish restoration based on the model that I had been developing in Coffin Bay, quite small, modest, a few extra sites. And they really ran with it. Initially, it was 15 reefs that Malinauskas announced, and the communication around that was a bit of a nightmare to clarify what these reefs were going to be and what they aren't. But initially, finally, the algal bloom summer plan was announced with $20 million for environmental restoration. About half of that has gone to the Nature Conservancy to build a large limestone boulder reef, approximately could be up to 16 hectares, not too far from where Windera Reef was constructed, and $2 million for this 25 reef restoration, community-based reef restoration project that I'm now trying to deliver. $2 million sounds like a lot of money, but if you divide that by 25 sites, it's not a huge amount considering I've got to work across several thousand kilometres of coastline. There's also a certain amount of funding for seagrass projects and for some conservation restocking. And a small amount of money also went to Ozfish to do a community-based reef on the Adelaide metropolitan coast, which Brad Martin is leading. I was asked, because it then became a government project, I had to put dots on a map, and I really didn't want to do this because co-design, identifying sites with community is so important to me. But nevertheless, this map was produced based on historical data. Those grey lines are where there's high confidence that historic reefs existed. And so this map was produced, and I've been having to reassure fisheries, aquaculture, and so many community groups. It's created so much uncertainty and concern around the project for me that has been alleviated when I go and talk to people and say, no, these are not identified sites yet. But since then, we have identified a few sites. We've got a couple in Coffin Bay. Port Lincoln is looking really good. We've got 2 more in Tumby Bay. And just this morning, we started work in Kangaroo Island. So it's been a busy few months. How do you select 25 sites that will get permits? That's important. The historical data has been key, and we're really fortunate to have certainly a couple of excellent papers by Heidi Alloway and Sean Connell back in 2015, and by Brad Martin and co at Flinders University. That was published just last year. Really good timing. So really providing clarity around where reefs used to be. Contemporary data and oyster restoration, we've got some from our recent work, but I'll talk about a project that's nested within the 25 reef projects to identify where restoration looks feasible at the moment. Avoiding areas where we know we're not going to get permits, sanctuary zones, and anywhere that's going to do damage to existing habitats. And then the big ones are community support. So much consultation has gone into the last few months, and it will continue to be that way for another few years. And working very, very closely with commercial fisheries and aquaculture, who are understandably key stakeholders with a lot to risk if something goes wrong with these sorts of projects. A lot of it has been generated by things like maps showing where we might build large reefs, which are probably not representative of what the reefs will actually look like, and the potential competition, filter feeding competition with aquaculture leases. In any case, by the end of next month, I will probably met every single oyster farmer in South Australia. That's been a really big part of the last few months. But I wanted to know, even before this project started, what was still out there and recruiting. So Nicole Lindsay, this is one of her PhD chapters, a gargantuan one, where we deployed over 100 settlement units. These are crates with limestone boulders, settlement panels, and hessian bags to look at in-fauna that likes to settle into byssus threads and seagrass and things like that, like razorfish. We deployed those at over 24 sites across the state, starting in December, and those are coming in now. We started bringing them in last month already. We've brought them all in from the Yorke Peninsula. The team will be bringing some in this week from American River, just to know what's still out there and recruiting when we've had such high mortality. And we know working in marine restoration, systems can bounce back quickly, but we're definitely anticipating some local extinction, and we're not sure how long it's going to take for certain groups to recover. Thankfully, certainly from a shellfish restoration perspective, the native oysters have been, we've found them at every single site where we've put these units out, and in some places in incredibly high abundance. We've also been able to generate data on cryptic fish species, which are otherwise kind of difficult to find. And we've seen that the oysters were recruiting even while the bloom was still in train in certain areas. So Stansbury is an oyster growing region. They've still got brevetoxin levels, even though the bloom has moved on, but they had the bloom persistent for a long, long time. The oyster farms were closed for ages. But even throughout that bloom, the oysters were feeding on some of the Corynea species at least, and reproducing in pretty high numbers with more or less no abnormal mortality observed of those farmed oysters. So that's quite reassuring. So yes, this data is going to be really important to give us sort of identify some of those sites where we really might have a good opportunity to target restoration, and it's helped identify a few key ones, and we can then take that information to community and share it with government and others who are other key stakeholders. Keeping those principles of social capital and equity in restoration, there's been a lot of engagement going on around site selection and how communities want to participate, and doing that through native title services, working with a bunch of different Aboriginal corporations to understand what level of involvement and where they would like to see reefs. The hope is for sea country ranger programs in some areas. That looks like it's going to be feasible in the next few years. In others, there's a lot more work to do. But there isn't necessarily funding for that at this stage. But I'm confident that we'll be able to get some really exciting local monitoring programs going. And that's obviously key. I've got a team of 2 dedicated PhDs to deliver some of the research, but we need to lean on local resources and knowledge and citizen science as well, and that's certainly what we're trying to achieve. As I mentioned, I've spoken to almost every oyster farmer. There's been a lot of consultation with the diversity of commercial fisheries across the state, And the take-home message is don't encroach on our fishing grounds, and that's certainly what we're going to try to do, because most importantly, more important than scale or other outcomes, is making sure that this is a sustainable model that isn't impacting other livelihoods. So we can keep this work going with industry backing. Community groups, there's so many ways to get in touch, but we need local community champions for every single one of these projects. So progress associations have been useful, and to contact to start that conversation, coast care groups, but really importantly, getting on the ground and doing open community forums where people can ask questions and vent their frustrations. Some of those are very targeted sessions, like we have targeted sessions with First Nations groups and with the fisheries, and some of them are just welcoming everyone. Landscape boards and local councils, absolutely key, because we need to have places where community can come together and start to bag the shell that we're going to be building these reefs out of. And that's another reason why oyster farmers are absolutely critical, because they have been growing the reef base that we're going to use to form these reefs. And then local schools, to make sure that we're getting those early generations. And like the Greenly Beach projects, if you bring in local school students, you're bringing in multiple generations into the tent to get involved in these conservation and restoration projects. So local schools, everyone's super keen. It's just about us managing our resources and sort of because we at this stage can't engage everyone, but we've had some excellent shell bagging days with students out at our site. So you need a lot of infrastructure to do this many reefs, and that's what we've been able to get up and running over the last few months. This is our shell recycling centre in Coffin Bay, the epicentre for the project, and it's that's been a real success story thus far. We've been able to get a hell of a lot of shell because of some of the conversations that started long before this work was happening. There's a group of oyster farmers in Spokey Bay that anticipated reefs being built at some stage and have been stockpiling shell for close to 10 years. And we were able to take that shell from them. They were ready for us, waiting for the call. So we've got about 100 tonne of shell delivered that had already been stockpiled. And then we're working with local restaurants, but only in Coffin Bay areas, only in Coffin Bay and areas where we know the origin of the shell, just to reduce that biosecurity risk. We can then cure that shell, clean it on site, and then truck it around. And we've got a nice big truck that we've purchased. Looks like my videos are not working, but also working with local tourism operators, so the Glass Bottom Boat Company, Cutties. So they run a Glass Bottom Boat tour for cuttlefish, and that season persists through winter. Hopefully it still exists. We don't know yet, because the harmful algal bloom did get right up to that area. But outside of summer, outside of that cuttlefish season, it wasn't necessarily being used. And so it's been fantastic to be able to work with the industry. And these are all locals that have come out and been able to see reefs being built. And we started this campaign at Tuna. We started the most recent reefs at Tunarama Festival, a really fun festival which is famous for the tuna toss. You can see at the top there, that's no longer a real tuna. See how far you can throw a tuna. We got the word out with it by having a stall for this 3-day festival. And this is a video posted by Environment Minister, or rather former Environment Minister Lucy Hood, who got to come out on one of the boats. So really fantastic opportunity to engage the public in all sorts of oystery stuff. The Glass Bottom Boat Company have modified one of their glass panels to create this trapdoor, so bags can be deployed on these little tours. It's fantastic for a minister to get their opportunity to get excited about shellfish restoration, but it's even more fantastic when you see kids getting to go out and deploy a few bags and have a small patch of reef named after them. That's really rewarding stuff. So it's just been full steam ahead to get the permits in place, reassure communities, identify sites, etc. I've got lots of research questions I want to answer, but there's limitations when you're working with communities as well, because we've got so many moving parts that we need to juggle. But we've been able to, the reefs are being built in shallow areas where appropriate, so communities can engage with them. We don't want to put them in deep, sharky waters because not many people are going to be able to get in and actually see these habitats develop. This is an image of a small patch of those first deployments at Port Lincoln. That was in January. It's now covered in oysters, which is fantastic, and we're going to be going back this month to get our first data. But we have a lot of reef base and a team of divers to get in there and really answer some exciting questions around reef design, height, breadth, undulation, and also I've only talked about oysters, but of course multi-species restoration, shellfish restoration is what we're really interested in. So designing reefs so we can bring back multiple species. So those are the questions that we can start to tackle next season come October, November, when the waters warm up and we've got permits in place, we've caught our breath, we'll be able to start to design reefs in ways to answer really key questions about sort of the best reef designs. That includes seascape connectivity, proximity to other habitats, what distances from mangroves and seagrass and salt marsh should be construction these, what are the energy flows between those habitats, and importantly, what are the fisheries productivity benefits? And we've got a lot of opportunities to work in those upper Gulf regions where they've lost shellfish reefs in a big way, and we know that those are areas that are so important for so many different commercial and recreational fish species. Everyone loves the sound research, so I've been asked to do that again. So more sound research underwater, using underwater speakers to intensify recruitment processes. I'm also interested in olfactory signals as well for razorfish and other species that have been really heavily hit. There's so much excellent research that we can lean on to design these reefs to answer some of those questions. And I'm really excited to have conversations going forward over the next few months with researchers across Australia about what these could look like, the opportunities there. So local people, local shell wherever possible, co-designs that aren't AI generated, but real reefs answering important ecological questions. We have a unique opportunity to incrementally build these reefs. We're allowed to build up to a hectare at each site. The size will be determined by community enthusiasm and energy. And this map may well be fairly representative of where the reefs are going to go, from as far west as Ceduna and certainly on Kangaroo Island. We have an opportunity to look at what's recruiting and what's missing following the harmful algal blooms in impacted areas and non-impacted areas, and we can incrementally build over time to generate the evidence base we need to go much, much bigger. So I'll leave it there just to have a few minutes for question time. Yes, thanks for listening. And there's so many people to acknowledge. I've got a fantastic team that have been able to build over a short period of time, and really appreciative of everyone's tireless energy in this space.